Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Rabbi.
So good to see you all. Let us thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we will get in. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So all of us share this dilemma that we wake up in the morning and we just see horrifying stories every day of civilians who are attacked, etc. And it's unpleasant to engage, and it's irresponsible to not engage. So we have to find a Jewish lens with which to understand the world that we're living in now, including the gruesome and horrifying headlines that all of us wake up to every morning. So what I wanted to do today is to share with you a text that you would not know if you just came to shul. If you just came to shul on Purim, you would know that what the Jews did in response to the hate that they received was to take very bloody vengeance on the Persians and Haman and people who attacked them in chapter 9. And chapter 9 is a story of hate begetting hate, and it's very bloody. You would know that. And if you happen to have been in shul on Shabbat, you would have seen for Shabbat Amalek, Parshat Amalek, where we deal with people who attack the vulnerable for no good reason. You saw in the Maftra Aliyah that Amalek attacks us, and then you saw in the Haftarah that God commands genocide of Amalek, that Saul is to kill women and children and infants and sucklings too. So that you would know about that tradition. But there is, and I'm not going to deal with those today. What I want to offer you for your Tuesday morning at 9:30 is an alternative Jewish tradition that deals with this issue of hate. What do you do with hate? How do you deal with hate? How do you respond to hate? In a completely different way. Not, well, if they hate me, I'll hate them harder. If they hit me, I'll hit them harder. If they murder me, I'll murder more of them. Not that, but a counter response. This is in the Talmud. It's in the tractate Gittin. It does not have a liturgical setting. That is to say, you'll never encounter this in shul. You'll never encounter this in services. You'll only encounter this if you learn it. So let's learn it together. So the context, let me just lay out the context, and then we'll look through it line by line. And it is to give you a trigger warning. Some of this stuff is very gruesome and very harrowing and very horrible, but that's kind of where we are at. What's the context? The context is the original Horban, the destruction of the first temple, 586. And a few weeks ago, we looked at the house of God that Solomon built, and it's made of the finest materials. And remember, we looked at the time, and Solomon makes this speech, and we read it in the Haftarah for Pekudei, and he says that this is God's house, and it is going to be olamim, forever. It's made out of the best materials. It's God. It's my father David. It's me. It's going to be forever. But it's not forever. It's destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians. Okay, we all knew that. Here's what you might not know unless you looked at Gittin, page 57b. We know about the general of Babylonia who comes and does this. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. But what you don't know unless you read this passage is he has a general named Nebuzaradan. Nebuzaradan is actually the guy who is on the field killing the Jews. And what happens in this Talmudic passage, and there's some drama to it, it's basically in three parts. First is it gives you some gruesome mathematics that when Nebuzaradan, for Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, kills the Jews, it's just horrible numbers. So that's the part where you read about how many Ukrainians were killed, how many have been, etc., how many have been shelled, how many have died. And what you get is that it is a bloodbath. part one of the story. That's not the most disturbing part. Part two is a really opaque story where Nebuzaradan goes to the temple. And as this opaque story relates it, you'll see it inside. There is a Kohen, who is both a Kohen and a prophet, named Zechariah ben Yehoiada, who apparently was a righteous guy, a good guy, a decent guy. And he was killed by fellow Jews in kind of an internecine war. And as the story relates it, Zechariah's blood is boiling in the temple, meaning it's on the ground. That is to say, there's a lot of blood in this whole story. Nebuzaradan comes into but he sees blood on the temple and he finds out it's from this prophet who was killed years earlier, 250 years earlier. And somehow Nebuzaradan wants to appease this blood, somehow atone for this blood. This is the really gruesome part. And so he starts killing even more innocent people. The echoes are obvious and disturbing. Even more, in other words, when a villain, when a violent person, when a warmonger is in the full bloom of their violence, they keep going for more and more civilians, more and more horrifying targets, women, children, horrible stuff. And that does not appease this Zechariah's blood. At which point you will see inside, and this is a lot to talk about, Nebuzaradan decides, oh my God, what have I been doing? And he converts to Judaism. And he does this kind of instant and radical teshuvah. Now that story, that is that Putin, in the midst of the war, after unleashing all this violence on civilians, would do radical teshuvah. That's part one, the villain himself. Okay, that's a part of the story that does not get much press at all. But let's look at it inside. Both the mathematics of blood, then double clicking on this one particular weird story, and then Nebuzaradan's seems like a rash decision to convert to Judaism. But then the second part follows from that, which is a different case, not the villain who commits the murder, but rather the descendants of the villain. And then what the Gemara is going to bring is a rogues gallery of the worst enemies of the Jewish people, including Haman, including Sancheriv, who had destroyed the northern kingdom in 721, and including Sisera, who's the Canaanite general that Yael kills in Judges 4 and 5. And all of those arch enemies of the Jewish people, it's not that they convert to Judaism, but their descendants convert to Judaism. And in fact, go to Israel and in fact, study Torah and teach Torah in Israel. It's right. So in other words, it's obviously Purim on Wednesday night. And what you're going to read is that the grandchildren of Haman, who were not killed, it was the 10 sons of Haman who were killed. But the children of those 10 sons of Haman, the grandchildren of Haman, what do? According to this teaching, they go to Israel, to Bnei Brak, which is a very Orthodox section, and they become teachers of Torah. And this trope repeats itself a few times in this paragraph. So what I want to do is look at both use cases. The case of the villain, the Putin who converts, does that seem at all plausible? What's the Talmud possibly teaching us? And then I want to look at the second use case, which is the descendants of violent people, and do they somehow recant their ancestors' violence? And I've enclosed in the reading an article about the descendants of Nazis. There is actually there's a whole documentary called Bloodlines, which takes a look at descendants, grandchildren of Nazis who have the worst names in the Third Reich. And if you read the article, and there's more like it, you will see that some are unregenerate Nazis generations later. They support their loved ones, they support their grandparents, but others really do teshuvah and spend the rest of their life trying to make amends for what their gruesome grandparents did. So there's at least some basis to reality for this teaching. So that is the overview. And the question I want to ask you is, what does this not well-known teaching say to us today? So before we look inside, any thoughts, comments, questions as we look at this teaching? Anybody have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. Okay, with that then, Rhiannon, thank you for hosting our class. And if you'll get to the first page, okay? So the Gemara describes the carnage wrought by Babylonian forces during the period of the destruction of the first temple, okay? So this is a bloody, gruesome period. It's called Horban, which is destruction. That's the destruction. Think about the destruction we see playing out every day. And it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Rabbi Chia bar Arvin said, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, one elderly resident of Jerusalem told me that in this valley, Nebuzaradan, the chief Babylonian executioner, slaughtered 211 myriads, i.e. 2,110,000 people. And in Jerusalem, he slaughtered 94 myriads, 940,000 people on one stone, until their blood flowed and touched the blood of Zechariah that lay seething on the temple floor. This served to fulfill that which is stated, v'damim b'damim naga'u, blood touched blood. Okay, so in other words, you start with the basic premise that this Nebuzaradan is killing civilians, slaughtering civilians by the huge numbers, by the myriads, okay? So much so that there's a lot of blood in Jerusalem, and you get the sense of blood flowing and blood dripping down the cobblestones and dripping down the stones of Jerusalem, until now that leads into a story of an unavenged wrong. That is this blood. So I'm gonna just read for you, Rhiannon, if you'll just go for a second, I want to read footnote 1. If you can just lift up the text for a second, that's good. Okay, that's good. This gives you the context. So all the blood of the people that Nebuzaradan are slaughtering runs into the blood of this Zechariah. So what's the story? Footnote 1, 252 years earlier, the Kohen and prophet Zechariah ben Yehoyada was murdered in the temple courtyard. The aristocrats of Judah, who had been rebuked by Zechariah for treating King Joash as a deity, slew Zechariah at the king's bidding. This is a case where, the prophet speaks truth to power and dies. As Zechariah died, he said, "May Hashem witness and demand an account." Zechariah's blood lay seething on the floor of the temple. No attempt to cover it with earth and to hide the shameful deed was successful. So what you have here is an unavenged wrong, where a good prophet was killed by an evil king, and that iniquity is unavenged. Now, Rhiannon, if you can go back up to the main text here, that's perfect. So now, all of a sudden, Nebuzaradan gets invested in this story and wants to know, how do we make Zechariah's blood not boil? How do we get it to be atoned? So when Nebuzaradan found Zechariah's blood boiling and bubbling on the temple floor, he asked the priests, "What is this?" They said to Nebuzaradan, "It is blood of sacrifices that was spilled." So they lied to him. They didn't want him to know their dirty laundry. Nebuzaradan brought the bloods of various animals to compare them with the blood boiling on the ground, but they did not resemble it. Nebuzaradan said to them, "If you tell me whose blood this is, fine, but if you do not tell me, I will tear your flesh with iron and combs." You don't mess with the Babylonians. By the way, that's how Rabbi Hatikva was killed in the martyrology, with flesh and iron combs. So this is pretty gruesome. The priest said to him, "Now we have to tell you our dirty laundry. What can we tell you? There was a prophet among us who would rebuke us in divine matters. We rose up against him and murdered him. And it is many years now that his blood has not rested. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, I will appease him. Okay. Somehow, so Nebuchadnezzar, who's this executioner, and the question now is, how do you, and you think about, just pause for a second. When you think about what's happening in Ukraine, how in some cosmic sense do you make this right? When you read about this pregnant woman who loses her baby and then she dies, when you read about all of this tragic, senseless death, how do you make this right? How do you make this right? What happens to that energy? All of that slaughter, this is a horrible story, and I apologize for having to teach it to you, but that's kind of our context. We wake up every day to slaughter. We wake up every day to stories of innocent people like this pregnant woman and her unborn baby who are now dead. And the question of this Gemara is, and it's interesting, and feel free to comment on this when we chat about it. This question is put in the mouth of the chief executioner, and his question is, what do we do with unatoned violent death and blood, and how do you ever cleanse that? I know, in other words, the blood boiling and bubbling on the floor there is dirtiness, there is filth, there is degradation in a society. How is it ever cleaned up? How do you ever get a fresh start? What do you do with that? Okay, that's the question kind of our time, and it's the question of this story. So now Nebuchadnezzar said to him, I will appease him. That is, I'm going to try to clean up this blood. Okay, he brought the judges of Great Sanhedrin and the minor Sanhedrin, and he slew them over Zechariah's blood, but still it did not rest. In other words, his first move is, I'm going to take the powerful. So the rich and powerful people who had sided with the evil king against this righteous prophet, we're going to kill the henchmen of the king. We're going to kill all the most powerful people, but still it did not rest. That didn't do it. Okay. He brought youths and maidens and slew them over Zechariah's blood, but still it did not rest. He brought school children and slew them over Zechariah's blood, but still it did not rest. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed to the blood, Zechariah, I have exterminated their finest. Do you want me to exterminate them all? When Nebuchadnezzar said this to the blood, it rested. At that moment, thoughts of repentance entered his mind. He reasoned. Now, if the punishment for killing one soul, Zechariah, is so severe, then that man himself, Nebuchadnezzar, who killed all those people, right? I've just killed all those myriads that we learned about in the first paragraph. I just killed the powerful structure of Judah, what's left in this crazy story. And then I've killed women and children and school children. Look at how much blood I've got on my hands. And now I realize, if the people who killed Zechariah's blood is a stain on society, and that's just one guy, oh my God, what about me? I've killed all those people. I am like, what have I done? What have I done? Arak, he ran away. Azal Shadar Shtar Partata Bavete. He went and sent a document of instruction to his household, detailing what was to be done with his property. The Igayer, and he converted to Judaism. Okay. So in other words, he basically, and Rhiannon, you can come back now to the full screen, because that's the first story. He gets his affairs in order. He's going to change up his life. You get the sense that he's leaving Babylon. He's leaving his, he was in Nebuchadnezzar's inner circle. He gets his affairs in order. And the only way I can atone for all the violence is to do teshuvah, is to become a Jew, is to become a disciple of peace. And that's the end of this first story. So comments, thoughts, and questions. The next part is going to be about the descendants of a villain, not the villain himself. But this first story is about the villain himself. I guess my question is, what are your reactions to this story? What do you think is the point of this story? And is there any sense in which this story is actually true or points to a truth about our world? Please help, dear class. Love your thoughts and comments. John Boris, thank you.
I find this solution very unsatisfactory. How does converting to Judaism atone for evil deeds? It sort of reminds me, is Abramovich, the very rich oligarch, who is a dual citizen of Israel and Russia, is he okay because he's Jewish? It doesn't make any sense to me, this story.
Right. So I could not agree with you more, John. It's not like converting to Judaism is to get out of jail free pass for all the bad stuff you've done. Right. And surely the authors of the Talmud must know this. So my question is, what could they be saying? What else could they? I mean, at the surface read of this is so unconvincing. What else could this be saying? What else could this be saying that is real and true? I'll throw out one idea. I mean, this is kind of a grim sign of where our world is at. I was listening to an NPR piece yesterday, on Point or whatever it was, one of the shows, and it had the very lovely topic of nuclear war. It was talking about, Putin has his nuclear arms on high alert, and we have nuclear arms, and Zelensky says that Putin is bluffing because Putin is clearly a murderer. There's no doubt about that. But if he does the nuclear option, then he's guilty of suicide. And he's not a suicide person. He's not suicidal. He would die himself, and his whole country would die, and the world would die. I guess my point in that is that's actually the state of conversation now. I mean, that was what Zelensky said, murder, suicide, difference. And I think perhaps one of the points that this is making is that if violence begets violence begets violence, in the end, that solves nothing. So I don't think, John, this is about, become Jewish, go to Mayim Chaim, join Temple Emmanuel, and then all your sins are forgotten. I don't think it could be saying that. What I think it could be saying is that if you just fight violence with more violence, we'll ratchet things up and use nukes. Oh, you're going to use nukes? We'll use nukes too. We'll all use nukes. Then all you have is a dead world. And I think this is saying we have to reach for a nonviolent option. I think that seems to be what this is saying. John?
It also seems to be saying that the first step in redemption, if it were, is acknowledging you've done something wrong.
Right.
Realizing it and internalizing it. That's the only positive thing I get out of the story.
Right. And what is it in this story that makes that insight finally land for this bloodthirsty murderer? Right. And when you click on that moment, it's interesting because he, very often people are moved by their heart, not by their mind. Right. Like, it's the image of this pregnant woman dying, or the images of people on the street who are dead. It's those graphic images that affect our heart that shock the conscience more than a rational calculation. And Nebuzaradan kills all these people, including, he climaxes this horrible story with youths and maidens and school children, right? So he goes to the most innocent of the innocent civilians, and none of that stops him. And then finally, he has an insight. And if you look at the form of it, just so that you know, this is called a kal v'chomer, or reasoning from minor to major premise. It's very Talmudic. This is like, the way the Talmud gets lampooned. If Zachariah is so upset because there's only one person who got killed and still it's unappeased, then all the more so all the people that I killed are unappeased. Like it's kind of grotesque ratiocination when and one wonders why the rabbis put that kind of a thought process in his head versus just being appalled at what he did. What do you think about that, John? Nothing, right? It's a tough story. Anyone else have any views on this story, which just seems to be saying violence begetting violence is not the way. Some part of the way has to be to embrace a spiritual tradition. Anyone? Debbie Ginsburg.
Yeah, I recall seeing the blood couldn't be covered up. So one positive of this horror of the war is perhaps democracy will somehow seep out in Russia. We read every day, see every day that there are more protesters. And today I saw that the Russian state-run TV had a protester with a sign behind the newscaster about the war being terrible and the Russians are being fooled. So maybe there will be, when Putin is killed or thrown out, whatever, maybe there will be some democracy in the future in Russia.
Yeah. One last, thank you, Debbie. One last point about this. Every morning and every night, including this morning, we pray for peace, page 75 in the Red Siddur. And every time we do it, I always, as I've shared with you before, I have misgivings like, what is this exactly? We're praying that nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and we come to realize that we weren't brought here to hate and to destroy, but to love, to labor, to build, and let justice roll like a mighty stream. And we keep saying these words, and the reality is the opposite of these words. And I keep wondering what's the point of this? And perhaps this story is something of a response to that question, which is, we need a spiritual lodestar, lest the world just descend into violence, begetting more violence. And maybe that is one of the lessons. Okay, the fact that this guy converts now leads to the next piece. And so Rhiannon, if you can go back, please, to page 1. And here we go. Having mentioned, this is in the second column, middle of that second column, having mentioned that Nebuzaradan converted to Judaism, the Gemara cites a Baraita that enumerates other enemies of Israel who became associated with Judaism. A Tana taught in a Baraita, Naaman was a resident convert. So Naaman was an Aramean general. Then Nebuzaradan ger tzedakaya. He became a righteous convert. It's hard to, I share John Boris's, I know we all share John Boris's sense that this is somewhere between not convincing and repulsive, that somebody who could have done all that violence is just in a very facile fashion now deemed a ger tzedek, a righteous convert. But okay, we'll go with it. And that's, I mean, with a big asterisk. Okay, now comes the part that if this piece of Gemara is taught at all, these are the lines. Mibnei banav shel Haman limdu Torah b'Bnei Brak. Descendants of Haman taught Torah in Bnei Brak. Mibnei banav shel Sisera limdu tinokot b'Yerushalayim. And descendants of Sisera, the horrible Canaanite general in Judges 4 and 5, taught children in Jerusalem. Mibnei banav shel Sancheriv. This guy was the Assyrian king that destroyed the northern kingdom in 721. A few years ago at the Museum of Fine Arts, there were some friezes of Assyrian art, and there's a lot of Sancheriv, and suffice it to say, he's super violent and he gets off on, I mean, these are in the friezes that were at the MFA having violent animals, vicious animals pit against one another. What happens if you have two lions fighting each other? Isn't that a wonderful way to entertain yourself? What if you have a vicious dog and a vicious lion fight each other? That's kind of what Sancheriv did to unwind, is just to watch viciousness. So he's a vicious guy, destroys the northern kingdom, but descendants of Sancheriv taught Torah in public. And who are they? They are Shmaya and Avtalyon, who are seen as the kind of the ancestors of rabbinic Judaism. So Rhiannon, if you can come back to full screen, please. So you have this additional, this is a second use case that descendants of horrible people somehow spend their life trying to do repair and atonement. They are ambivalent about, not ambivalent, embarrassed about their last names, and they spend their life trying to do just the opposite. What do you think of this teaching? And do you feel more comfortable with this teaching than with the story of Nebuzaradan's facile conversion? Any takers for that? Annette, thank you. If you can unmute, please.
Sorry, I thought I did.
Yeah.
We all know and have heard many stories of people who, are ashamed, they're embarrassed, and they change their lives. And whether it's the children, and we know of some. But right now, that's not where my head is. My head isn't thinking forward to 2 generations from now. I'm living in today, and I can't seem to think, what are the people going to do in 2 generations? It doesn't help.
Well, sorry about that. Let me just gently push back a little bit on that, because I actually think the fact that we feel the way we feel about Ukraine is some validation of this. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday by a guy who begins, his first paragraph begins like this. Poland, Russia, Lithuania, Ukraine, most American Jews, think that they're all the same, and had not really privileged one over the other, and have grandparents who hate the whole area. Which, by the way, struck home for me, because my grandmother always said she came from Russia, Poland, and Russia, Poland, Ukraine, all of it was Lithuania, killing fields for the Jews. And in fact, in Kyiv, today, there is a statue of Khmelnytsky, who was really a precursor to Adolf Hitler, a vicious Jew hater, who killed in the 17th century tens of thousands of Jews. And to this day, there is a statue of Khmelnytsky. In Jewish history, he's known as Khmelnytsky's massacre. Okay. This writer in the Wall Street Journal yesterday quotes his rabbi, Joshua Scott, who has 2 grandparents who come from Ukraine. And these grandparents hated Ukraine and hated the anti-Semitism they personally experienced. And Josh Scott grew up, this is in the article in the journal yesterday, grew up about how Ukraine, Lithuania, Russia, Poland, they hate us, which is how I grew up. They hate us. It's a killing field. See Khmelnytsky's massacre statue in proudly displayed in Kyiv today. And he writes, but the present reshapes the past. And what's happening now reshapes how we understand past history, and that there's now a swell of sympathy, even in Jews who never felt this before, for Ukrainians, despite Khmelnytsky's massacre statue still there, proudly displayed in the town square, that the present reshapes the past. So what I want to say to you, Annette, is I definitely hear what you're saying, that what's going to be with future generations feels not applicable to the urgency of the moment. But what I take from this is that there's kind of a fluid relationship between past and present, between history and present, and that generational views on areas and on conflicts change. And that seems to be what this is saying. And I'm wondering what the implications of that are for this area now. But I agree with you. What the issue is justice for Ukraine now, but it is kind of interesting to note that it wasn't until February 24th that Jews I mean, there were always people who cared about Dnepro. Barbara Gaffin talked about it. Betsy Hecker talked about it. David Link, may he rest in peace, worked on it. A lot of people in Boston worked on it. So we were concerned about Dnepro, a Jewish outgrowth in Ukraine. But it wasn't until this war when the Jewish people really started caring about Ukraine and kind of gave a pass to Ukraine for centuries of massacres. So there is a generational thing going on. Any other views on this teaching about the descendants of Haman? Well, I see from the silence that this is going over well. I'll tell you why I brought it to you. I feel like it's pretty hopeless. The news is just kind of grim and hopeless. And literally, if you keep following the news stories, it ends up talking about nuclear war. That's pretty grim and hopeless. And when you read some of our normative texts, like the Haftorah for Shabbat, or Megillat Esther, chapter 9, that reinforces the hopeless thing, that we're just in this cycle of hatred begetting hatred. I wanted to bring you a text that had a different idea, which is that we're not prisoners of our past, and that different generations. So I want to just show you that I want to just bring one example of this in our own time. So Rhiannon, if you look on page 3 of the handout, what is it? This is in the, and keep going down a little bit, Rhiannon. Keep going. Perfect. What is it like to live with a surname such as Himmler? Katrine Himmler, a political scientist who is Heinrich Himmler's great niece, answered that question in a 2012 interview with BBC News magazine. It is a very heavy burden, having someone like that in the family so close. It's something that just keeps hanging over you. She wrote The Himmler Brothers, a German family history, in an effort to bring something positive to the name Himmler. I did my best to distance myself from it and to confront it critically. In her view, the descendants of the Nazi war criminals appear to be caught between two extremes. Most decide to cut themselves off entirely from their parents so they can lead their lives so that a story doesn't destroy them, or they decide on loyalty and unconditional love and sweep all the negative things away. And there's Katrine ended up marrying an Israeli whose family was confined to the Warsaw Ghetto, which was burned to the ground on her great uncle's orders. And if you read the whole article, there is a lot of talk about how the descendants of these Nazis end up connecting with survivors or the children of survivors or Israelis. In other words, there is some, unlike the Nebuzaradan use case, which does not seem very credible to me, it does seem like there is an energy towards redemption that the second teaching speaks about that is credible. So Rhiannon, if you can come back to full screen. Elise.
I think these stories are interesting about the descendants trying to deal with the guilt of their ancestors or parents, and so they do something that is laudable. But then history shows us that it's only a matter of generations before their children will again turn. That's my reaction. I find that the Gittin message is way too optimistic, and we've seen generation after generation. I think, you know, in what it says. Isn't it the Haggadah, in generation after generation they rise up against us?
Right.
And I think that's I can't get away from that. I'm sorry. I wish that I could believe.
Right. Right. Every generation, every generation, every generation they come to destroy us. So, Elise, here's my question for you. Remember, our national anthem is called Hatikva, the hope, right? So we're kind of not allowed, by virtue of our, covenant to relationship with the Jewish people, to just walk around as sad sacks, depressed. They hate us all the time. That's not the Jewish people on our best day. That's certainly not the state of Israel. That is not Hatikva. So here is the question that I want to share with you. How do we engage the world as it is and be hopeful? And how does all that intersect with Purim? I mean, it felt like 100 years ago that the tension of Purim was, how do we do Purim in year 3 of the pandemic? That's now, that's passé. We're done with the pandemic. Even if we're not done, we're done with the pandemic. Now the issue is, how do we do Purim with these headlines? What are your thoughts for, particularly where Purim deals with a lot of these themes of hatred and violence and destruction? So what's your mind set as you approach Purim this year?
Well, I keep hoping. I think it's a Hatikva. There's always the inclination. I think it's a human inclination to hope, to find humor in the terrible situations. I think that that's something that is intrinsically Jewish, to find humor some way. I mean, I always think that there's a line in Exodus that is the first comedian for in the Catskills. Weren't there enough graves in Europe that you had to take us out of? I mean, in Egypt, that you had to take us out to die in the desert. I think we want to have hope, and so we'll laugh about some things or try to find the humor. But there's little. I don't know. I'm feeling quite low these days. I have to admit it.
So, well, let me respond to that by saying this. In a way, the drama of the pandemic, just kind of flowed into the drama of the war. But I want to come back to the drama of the pandemic for a while, because it felt like forever we were never going to be back. But can I just tell you, if you want to feel good, if you want to feel hopeful, come to shul, because you will actually find a lot of people coming to shul. I mean, every night, the Gann Chapel is teeming with people who are there to support each other. Every morning, they have, poor Rita and Phyllis have more than 40 people that they're feeding breakfast to every morning. Friday night, Minyan Me'or service has 61 people in the Gann Chapel. And Shabbat Alive is really coming back, a lot of energy. Shabbos morning, we did not have a bar bat mitzvah. And all those of you who were there, there's real energy. So I don't have the answer to the war, obviously, and I don't have the answer to Putin, to all that desperation. But I can tell you that there are a lot of people who share that question, a lot of people who share that angst, and in ways that I can't quite explain. When lots of people who share a question that has no answer come together, there is some strength to be had in that. There is some strength to be had in that. And I just see it on people's faces, and I see it in my own soul, that fortunately the pandemic is to the point where people are coming back, and they're coming back in numbers, and they're coming back with energy. And when you come back, you won't have the answer to Ukraine, but you will feel good being in the presence of people who share your questions. Annette, and then Maddie. Annette Miller.
There I go. Wes, I think there's timing in everything. I think that it's okay to feel down now. I think it's okay. I think it's okay for everyone to say, this ain't a world I want to be in. And this is not a time, I think, to think about, in the next 20 years, 50 years, yes, there will be goodness that will come out of that. And some of these very people will turn around and help us. I don't know if that's the thought process now to give us hope. I think what we have to do, and the reason we come together now, is to, in some way, pray and come together as a community to wish for something more. So we're all feeling supported by one another in our hope and prayer for something better. But now is the time for action. This is not, I hear what you're trying to do, Wes, but it's like you once said about when you ask forgiveness, or someone was, you have to know that the party is ready to forgive. You can't say, I forgive you, and therefore everything is fine. You have to know who you're listening to. And I think that it's okay to feel despondent. And I think that despondency doesn't mean the end. And we have to look for hope. And yes, I was at shul on Saturday. And yes, I came because I wanted to be grateful for what I had. And there was a song we used to sing, Safety in Numbers. There is a sense of a community working towards something better, and that uplifts you, but it doesn't erase. And I'm not ready to hear about the descendants of these people, of Putin's people, or Putin, and they're all going to come around. And I am haunted, always haunted, by the end of Purim. And the end of Purim is exactly the opposite of what you're saying. The end of Purim was go out and kill the Amaleks, and everyone went out and killed. I didn't even have to bring that story to the end. I never read that to my grandchildren. I just, it's like I kind of like blocked that off, because what's that?
Right.
So, and I can't justify that, but that's another whole question. So, but Purim was a time of speaking out. So we are seeing this every day. And it's like, hello, have breakfast, and what? Oh, well, we got to speak out. This is a time for that. This is a time for letting Zelensky come and speak to us. He's the moral voice of all of us. Anyway, that's what I feel this time is about. I hear what you're trying to do, and I think it is important to come together. Okay. Sorry.
Annette, question for you.
Mhm.
How long are you okay being in a despondent place?
I think you have to be in a despondent place until you're not in a despondent place. I mean, I'm not looking, I found that, you said, to be a temple was kind of, you were with other people and you thought, okay, these are good people and there is some hope because people are trying to come. But I will feel more despondent. I will feel out of a despondent place when I see action. And I don't know how long. I don't know what that means either. I don't, I don't know that. I don't know how long.
Okay, well, Annette, thank you. Thank you for what you say and how you say it. I think Maddie Donald, your hand was up.
Yes, I wanted to get back to the fact that you talked about worrying about the next generation of the descendants who were feeling shame, and that their next generation may feel differently. I'm more concerned about the ones who never felt shame. And I think that there's a whole generation of those people in this country who are waving a Nazi flag and who are dispersing terrible things about the Jewish people. And I think that's something we have to continue to worry about. I was very moved by the stories in that article about the ones who had tremendous shame. And I think they will pass that along to their next generation. I'm not worried about it resurfacing with them. It's the ones who've never changed their opinion that we have to worry about.
Okay, thank you, Maddie. Okay, so we are meeting on, today is Tuesday. Tomorrow night is Purim. So here's your homework. Here's your homework. Show up for Purim. Show up for Purim. And I want to leave you with a question. You're going to be reading the Megillah, which is about a society in tumult, which is about a moment which demands political courage, which Esther finally rises to that moment. Obviously, Zelensky, as has been aptly noted by so many people, including Danny Gordis in his column this week, Zelensky seems to fulfill and embody that line from Mordechai, Mi Yodea Im La'et Kazot Higat L'Malchut, who knows if it was not for just such a moment that you arrived at this position. And Zelensky is embodying that, owning that space. My question to you, as you're reading a story that deals with the themes of our world, probably more directly than Purim has in years, and as you are doing so really for the first time in 2 years, coming back from the pandemic, coming together, reading this hard story at this hard time, what is the message of Purim to you now? I am constantly searching for and thwarted by the following frustration. I can't seem to find a text that speaks helpfully to this moment. I cannot seem to find a text that speaks helpfully to this moment. Even though it seems like they would speak helpfully to this moment, I can just see from your faces and hear from the silence that the texts that seem most on point don't advance anything emotionally or psychically. So my question to you, you teach me, go to Purim services, show up, follow the Megillah, read the Megillah, hear the Megillah, and you tell me what passage, what idea, what text speaks to our world in a way that's helpful for you. Elise Friedman.
Well, I don't know that this is at all helpful, but in the Haftarah from last Shabbos, Saul gets punished for not having destroyed all of Amalek.
Right.
Saul was a Benjaminite, and so is Mordechai, which means so is Esther. And that's when they get their revenge.
Well, that's all that is saying is that the story continues generationally.
That's right.
Generations, but the consensus wisdom on this call is, so what? That doesn't scratch my itch now. Don't tell me that future generations will make it right. I want justice now. I don't care that the children of Haman become tzaddikim. I want to know now. So I'm with you, Elise. I think there is all those texts say When today is desperate, take a long view. When today is despondent creating, take a long view. And in the long view of history, there will be moves in both directions. In the long view of history, there will be Jews who feel connected to Ukraine. In the long view of history, it will turn out that Ukraine's most heroic figure is Jewish and a descendant of survivors. And take a long view. And I'm with you. And I think that is a good point of connection, that Mordecai and Esther are descended of Saul. I'm just saying to you, that point didn't do much for this class today. So my question to you is, what will help you? So next week, I'm already pre-wiring you. My first question is, what did you learn from the Purim story this year that you found helpful? Let's have a whole class full of teachers, and maybe we'll teach one another, and maybe somewhere we will find something that helps. So I will see you tomorrow night in person. Chag Purim Sameach. Thank you.